Hello, today I am sharing with you how I make my own fresh milled flour sourdough loaves. So I have been grinding my own wheat berries for about a year and a half now, and it has been a little bit of a journey adjusting to working with fresh milled flour. I go into detail about this in my video on my grain mill and all of the pros and cons of this grain mill. I will link that video below. When working with fresh milled flour, you do have to adjust the ingredient levels because the fresh milled flour absorbs more water than the store-bought flour. So I have used recipes in the past that were just for store-bought flour, and they work okay. They definitely are much more dense than your store-bought flour sourdough, which can be a little bit frustrating if you're used to your traditional sourdough loaf with store-bought flour and the airiness of it, and then going from that to fresh milled flour where you get much more dense breads. I also think we've been trained to be used to store-bought flour, so I think part of it is changing our expectations when we change how we grind our flour. This is a traditional way, and so there is a more rustic feel to it, and embracing that the bread consistency is going to be a little bit different, but you're not sacrificing any of the nutritional benefits as you would with store-bought flour, which has been produced to be able to sit on the shelf for long periods of time and therefore is lacking in a lot of great nutrients that are in wheat berries if they are ground fresh. So after much trial and error, I stumbled upon this recipe on the Breadtopia website. They have a forum, and there was a man named Jonathan Mandel. He shared this recipe, and I have kind of adapted it to my style of doing sourdough, but all of the ingredient amounts are based off of his, and I have made this into a recipe on my website, and I have linked the forum where I got his original recipe. This is an 82% hydrated loaf. I am using 455 grams of fresh milled flour. I usually measure my wheat berries first and then I grind them, and I use either hard red wheat, hard white wheat, or a mixture of the two. About half the time I will sprout our wheat berries. I just didn't have time to in this video. I didn't have them ready, so I just used the wheat berries as is. But it's way better for your digestion if you are using sprouted wheat berries. And I was actually really intimidated by this, but it is so simple. You actually can sprout wheat berries from start to finish in 24 hours because all you need to see is the sprout beginning to emerge, and that is how you sprout your wheat berry, and then you dehydrate it either in a dehydrator or the oven, and that's usually more of a time-consuming thing because that does take a little longer, and that's ready to go. So obviously my sourdough is ready. I fed it about 8 hours prior to this, so it is nice and bubbly and ready to go. I've ground my wheat berries. Take a mixing bowl and add your sourdough starter. I used 46 grams of sourdough starter and then 373 grams of warm water. Mix it up just a bit, and then you can add your fresh milled flour and knead that for about a minute, and then I let it sit there for 40 minutes with a towel over it. After 40 minutes, I will put it back on the scale and I will add 12 grams of my Redmond's salt to it, and I have this in a bowl that goes onto my vintage mixer over here. Scott actually got this at an auction for 10 bucks, and it is probably one of my favorite things to date that we have gotten from an auction because it works so beautifully. I'm sure you could just do this by hand if you didn't have a mixer with the spirals. You mix it with the spiral mixers for 5 minutes on the lowest speed, and I try to help it out a little bit to keep it going since it is on the lowest speed. Then you let it rest for 5 minutes with the towel over it, and then after 5 minutes you turn it back on again at level 1 speed for another additional 5 minutes. And this is what it will look like. It is a very hydrated, sticky dough. Now at this point we are completely done with the mixer. I would say if you're using your hands, you can just knead it for that amount of time. And now I'm just folding it all together to get it into a ball shape. And now we are moving on to our stretch and folds, which we will do 4 times at 20-minute intervals. So I just pull it right in the bowl. I stretch and fold the 4 sides of it, and then after the last fold, I will turn it onto the side where I was pulling all the folds. and then I will once again cover it with the dish towel, set the kitchen timer for 20 minutes, because 20 minutes will fly by. If I don't set the timer, then I will forget about it, and then I will come back and do it again. And you'll notice each time you do it, it ends up stretching a little bit easier. Some people do this by grabbing the middle of the dough and shaking it so both sides fall down. This is just the way that I learned how to do it, and so that's my style of doing it. I think that's what's so fun with sourdough, is everyone has their own unique styles and ways of doing things and what they like and what works for them. It is fun to see how different people do sourdough and the different techniques that there are that works for them. And so this is my third stretch and fold. Again, you can see how beautiful the dough is forming. It's definitely feeling tighter as I'm pulling it to fold it, and we will let it sit for 20 minutes one more time. And this will be the last time that I do the stretch and folds. Now you can see the size of it. This is very important because I'm going to cover it with a towel and keep an eye on it. I'm going to let it sit and ferment for as long as it takes for it to get about 1.6 times the size of it. So depending on the temperature of the house, that could be 3 to 4 hours. Our house was pretty warm because I had the crock pot going, so this was about 3 hours later. You can see how it's expanded, and that's an estimation, the 1.6. I just make sure that it has definitely gotten bigger, and here you can see what it looks like when I pull it out of the bowl. And then I do one final stretch and fold just to bring it back into a ball form because it has expanded and gotten loose. So just to tighten up that dough a little bit before I then get some tightness in it as I pull it onto the counter. This is probably my absolute favorite part of bread making, is tightening up the dough ball like this. And after I shape it nice and tightly, I will let it sit at room temperature for 60 minutes, again, covered with a towel. I should say I will usually start this process around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then by this time it is around 9 or 10 o'clock when I'm ready to put it in the refrigerator for an overnight ferment. And then in the morning is when I will bake it. So after the 60 minutes is up, I will take that towel, put it into my basket, put some of my fresh milled flour into it. Again, shape it tightly, just again, because it does spread out a little bit over the course of an hour, just so it fits nicely into the basket. And then I will cover it with the towel, which is slightly damp, and then I will take a grocery bag and put the entire basket into the grocery bag, tie it up, and then I will put it in the refrigerator overnight. So at 7 in the morning, I've turned the oven on to 450 degrees with my Dutch oven inside of it to get nice and hot. This is now 8 o'clock. I've taken the dough straight out of the refrigerator, so it's still nice and cold. I will cut my slits into it. This is not as exciting as it would be with the store-bought flour, but it is still fun to do the slits in it. And then I will take my Dutch oven out, put the parchment paper and bread loaf inside of the steaming hot Dutch oven, and I will then cook it with the lid on for 17 minutes. And again, the oven is still at 450 degrees, the same temperature that the Dutch oven was preheated in. And then after 17 minutes, I will take the lid off and then put it back in without the lid for an additional 21 minutes. I love these leather oven mitts. They have been such a blessing for cast iron. I did a whole video on all things cast iron. I'll link that below if you're interested in it, but I do mention those in that video. So this is after the 21 minutes is up. It is fully baked. And now I usually try to get it out of the Dutch oven as soon as possible, put it on a cutting board, and then I will let it sit there for 30 minutes to an hour because it does still continue to bake when you take it out of the oven as long as you don't cut it open. So this is now an hour later, and we love our sourdough bread with the Sierra Nevada raw butter and our homemade grape jelly. And you can see the texture of it. So it doesn't have the giant holes that some sourdough loaves have with store-bought bread, but it definitely has such a good consistency. It's light, airy, and especially for it being a whole grain bread, this has by far been the best, most consistent recipe that I have found. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I bless you on your wheat grinding, bread making journey, and I bless the rest of your day.